This is the part 2 of the facts we were discussing on Harold Bloom. So, if you have not listened to the part 1, then please go and listen to it first. It's in the playlist that of Harold Bloom's playlist in my channel, on my channel. So, go and listen to the part 1 first and then come back to this part 2 and continue with it. So, here we go. The first of these books, the books that we discussed in part 1, remember which books I'm talking about? On Percy Bysshe Shelley, Shelley's myth making. It was his doctoral dissertation at Yale University. Then Blake's Apocalypse, then Yeats, then Wallace Stevens, The Poems of Our Climate. So the first of these books, first of these book, Yeats, Y-A-T-S, yes, challenged the conventional critical view of William Butler Yeats' poetic career. So, Yeats is the name of the book, okay? Written by Harold Bloom. The first of these books, Yeats, challenged the conventional critical view of William Butler Yeats' poetic career. In the introduction to this volume, Bloom set out the basic principles of his new approach to criticism. Poetic influence, as I conceive it, is a variety of melancholy or the anxiety principle. So, what did Bloom say? Poetic influence, as I conceive it, is a variety of melancholy or the anxiety principle. New poets become inspired to write because they have read and admired the poetry of the previous poets. But this admiration turns into resentment when the new poets discover that these poets whom they idolized have already said everything they wish to say. The poets become disappointed because they cannot be Adam early in the morning. There have been too many Adams, and they have named everything. In order to evade this psychological obstacle, according to Bloom, new poets must be convinced that previous poets have gone wrong somewhere and failed in their vision, thus leaving open the possibility that they may have something to add to the tradition after all. The new poets' love for their heroes turns into antagonism. So, who are the heroes? The precursor poems, the previous poems. The new poets' love for their hero turns into antagonism towards them. Initial love for the precursor's poetry is transformed rapidly enough into revisionary strife, without which in individualization is not possible. The book that followed Yeats, The Anxiety of Influence, which Bloom had started writing in 1967, drew upon the example of Walter Jackson Bates' The Burden of the Past and the English poet, and recast in systematic psychoanalytic form Bates' historicized account of the despair felt by the 17th and 18th century poets about their ability to match the achievements of their predecessors. Bloom attempted to trace the psychological process by which poets broke free from their precursor to achieve their own poetic vision. He drew a sharp distinction between strong poets who perform strong misreading of their precursors and weak poets who simply repeat the ideas of their precursors as though following a kind of doctrine. He described this process in terms of a sequence of revisionary ratios through which each strong poet passes in the course of their career. Bloom's fascination with the fantasy novel A Voyage to the Arcturus by David Lindsley led him to take a brief break from criticism, which he was very much interested in writing, in order to compose a sequel to Lindsay's novel. This novel, The Flight to Lucifer, was Bloom's only work of fiction. So, Bloom's only novel, The Flight to Lucifer, was written or composed as a sequel to Lindsay's novel, A Voyage to Arcturus. The Western Canon. It was written in 1994 by Harold Bloom. The Western Canon, a survey of the major literary works of Europe and the Americas since the 14th century, focuses on 26 works he considered sublime and representative of their nations and of the Western Canon. Western Canon is the European literature, European canon. Okay. Besides analysis of the canon's various representative works, Bloom's major concern in the volume was reclaiming literature from those he referred to as the school of resentment. So, why did Bloom write it? Bloom's major concern in the volume was reclaiming, he wanted to reclaim literature from those he referred to as the school of resentment. We know who are the school of resentment. I hope I said about it earlier. If you don't remember, you can go back to the part 1 of Harold Bloom and listen from there and again come back out here in this part 2, okay? So he tried to reclaim the literature from those referred to as the school of resentment. The mostly academic critics who espoused a social purpose in reading. Bloom asserted that the goals of reading must be solitary. Now, Bloom asserted that the goals of reading must be solitary, aesthetic, pleasure, and self insight rather than the goal of improving one's society held by forces of resentment. He cast the latter as an absurd aim. Writing, he wrote, the idea that you benefit the insulted and injured by reading someone of their own origin rather than reading Shakespeare is one of the oldest illusion ever promoted by or in our schools. His position was that politics had no place in literary criticism, that a feminist or Marxist reading of Hamlet would tell us something about feminism or Marxism, but probably nothing about Hamlet itself. Do you understand what was he arguing about? In addition to considering how much influence a writer had had on later writers, Bloom proposed the concept of canonical strangeness or the uncanny as a benchmark of a literary work's merit. The Western canon also included a list which aroused more widespread interest than anything else in the volume of all the Western works from antiquity to the present that Bloom considered either permanent members of the canon of literary class or candidates for that status among more recent works. Okay. Bloom said that he made the list of the top of his head at his editor's request and that he did not stand by it. Like that was what he claimed later on. Okay. Bloom had a deep appreciation for William Shakespeare. So you know Bloom had a deep appreciation for William Shakespeare also and considered him to be the supreme center of the Western canon. So he had a fascination for the romantics, you know it from beforehand. Now he also knew that he had a fascination for William Shakespeare also, and he considered him as a supreme center of the Western canon. The first edition of The Anxiety of Influence almost completely avoided Shakespeare, whom Bloom then considered barely touched by the psychological drama of anxiety. Here I end the second part of this Harold Bloom series. We will go to the third part. So if you liked this second part also, then do comment below, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, please to subscribe, and share this video with your friends so that they can also learn and understand it better. So now, right now, click on the third part of this video and know it in details about Harold Bloom. Do it now.